Senate Chairman Richard Durbin of the Senate Judiciary Committee and Sheldon Whitehouse, the chairman of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over the courts, have for the second time requested specific details from billionaire Harlan Crow regarding any gifts, travel, real estate, lodging, or payments that he or any entity he owns or controls provided to any member of the Supreme Court or their relatives. Lawyers for Harlan Crow have so far refused that request, arguing that it violates basic separation of powers principles and is effectively moot because Congress lacks the constitutional power to impose ethics rules and standards on the Supreme Court. Senators Whitehouse and Durbin responded, "This assertion likely comes as a surprise to the Supreme Court justices themselves, who have complied with many such laws for decades. Examples include the Ethics in Government Act, the Federal Gift Statute, the Foreign Gifts and Decorations Act, and the Federal Recusal Statute. Congress can enact, has enacted, and will continue to enact ethics legislation that applies to Supreme Court justices, and Congress has shown it can do so without posing any risk to the justices' decisional independence." A New York Times editorial titled "Who Can Rein in the Supreme Court" notes, "The American system of government is expressly designed for each branch to check the power of the others. In recent years, however, Congress has failed to live up to its co-equal status in the federal government, avoiding even mild confrontation with the Supreme Court. The question is not whether Congress has the power to act, but what a meaningful ethics regime should look like." Joining us now is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, and chair of the Senate Budget Committee. Senator, thank you for joining us once again on this crusade of yours that used to be lonely and now has much more company and much more interest, and certainly millions of people in this audience hanging on your every word about it. So this is round two. You just sent another letter to Harlan Crow's lawyers, which included a little bit of education that is actually kind of high school stuff. It's not even law school stuff about Congress's ability to do things like decide how many Supreme Court justices there are, and all sorts of other things about the court.
Yeah, so the status is that both the Finance Committee and the Judiciary Committee sent out initial information requests, and both committees got back letters that were basically emitted by a fog machine and really didn't have much merit. With respect to the Judiciary Committee letter that you asked about, they went on with 6 pages of verbiage about separation of powers without bothering to mention that the ethics rule at issue is actually a statute passed by Congress and is administered by an agency created by Congress. So the idea that Congress has no role in how a rule established by Congress and administered by a body created by Congress is actually administered, it doesn't pass the laugh test.
And your question to them is not just limited to Clarence Thomas. It could be that there are other dealings like that he has had with possibly other Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to get a handle on exactly what is going on up at the Supreme Court so that it's clear who is taking huge, undisclosed gifts from people who have interests involving the court. And we're going to continue to do that. These letters that we've received back from Harlan Crow's lawyer, to a lawyer, they're like putting up a highway billboard saying, "Investigate me." So if the purpose was to dissuade us, it's had the exact opposite effect.
I'd like you to listen to something that Chief Justice Roberts said just the other day. Let's listen to this.
"I want to assure people that I am committed to making certain that we as a court adhere to the highest standards of conduct. We are continuing to look at things we can do to give practical effect to that commitment. And I am confident there are ways to do that that are consistent with our status as an independent branch of government under the Constitution's separation of powers.
What was your reaction to that?
I was glad to hear that. That was the first crack in the wall of indifference that the Supreme Court to its ethics problems. And I suspect it comes from other judges, particularly the other judges who serve on the Judicial Conference, which is the administrative body overseeing the court. It's made up of senior judges, and I think they're pretty fed up with the behavior at the Supreme Court because they know better than anyone that it is out of line.
So he says we are continuing to look at things. How long should he look at things, and what should we expect of him?
Well, I think they need to come up with proper code of ethics. They more or less have one. So all they have to do is agree that it will apply to them. And that means that they've got to have a process for determining what the facts are and whether the code was complied with. There's none of that right now. There's not an inbox for a complaint. There's not somebody to sort the bad complaints from the meritorious one. There's not somebody to take the meritorious complaints and do investigation like the staff attorneys in the other courts. There's nobody to make an independent decision. And at the end of the day, you end up with no facts, like not knowing what Clarence Thomas actually knew about his wife's insurrection activities when he failed to recuse, which is the key fact in whether that recusal decision was lawful or not. So you have to build in a proper process for factual determination.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for joining us once again. Always appreciate it.